A little while back, I made a video about my experience as an introvert working in a corporate environment as a lawyer for over 6 years. That video focused more on the ways a corporate workplace can be kind of unsuitable or uncomfortable for introverts, and how I learned to manage working in that kind of environment, from preparing for small talk at office parties to hiding in the office bathroom. However, I left that job and that environment a little over a year ago. And now, by contrast, instead of working with a team in a firm with over 100 people, I now spend the vast majority of my time working by myself. After a year of this, I've come to realize that even though there were some aspects of working in a corporate environment that were uncomfortable, or sometimes even painful to be honest, they weren't necessarily bad. In fact, I actually think there were some things about working in a corporate environment that were surprisingly good for me, and I didn't really realize until I'd left. First off though, just a quick recap on what I mean by introversion and extroversion for those of you who haven't seen the video that I did on this topic before. For simplicity's sake, and for the purposes of this video, I'm going to broadly define introversion as follows. Having the tendency to prefer or to be more comfortable with less external stimuli such as noise or people or lights or even experiences. A pretty common example used to distinguish between introverts and extroverts is whether they find socializing, especially in large groups or with a lot of new people, something that gives them energy or drains them of energy. People who find this gives them energy tend to be extroverted, whereas people who find this draining or tiring tend to be introverted. Keep in mind though that this definition is just a generalization because obviously everyone is going to be different and humans are very nuanced and complicated. Anyways, now that that's out of the way, let's move on. So the first benefit that I got from working in a corporate environment despite being an introvert actually really surprised me. Like I talked about in my definition earlier, as an introvert, I find socializing too often or with too many people or with too many new or unfamiliar people quite tiring and draining, and that's because it feels like too much external stimulus. Instead, I find it more comfortable and more energizing actually to socialize less frequently and with fewer people at once, ideally in one-on-one situations. In terms of a work environment, while I was still working at a law firm, my preference was to be able to do most of my work by myself quietly at my desk, and to close the office door if I could, and to not talk to too many people too often. Of course, this wasn't the actual reality of the situation most of the time, since I didn't work by myself. I worked in a team, in an office full of people, and I was always calling or meeting clients or talking to colleagues. But it is that aspect of working in a corporate workplace that a lot of introverts commonly don't really like, because all the noise and the distractions from other people are distracting. I felt the same way, so I had assumed that working in my comfort zone, which I thought was largely alone without noise or really interruptions from other people in a corporate office, would be ideal for me. Funnily enough though, I discovered that after a year of working like that, and basically being left to my own devices to work in my perceived comfort zone, that comfort zone was actually not that comfortable. I actually ended up going too far in the other direction and ended up interacting with too few people, and in the end I actually felt understimulated because I wasn't socializing with people enough. So before, while I was still working in an office with other people, I actually felt perfectly fine not doing any social activities with others outside of work for up to a few weeks straight. I realized though, after I started spending the majority of my time working alone, whether it's in a coffee shop or at home, that this was because I was actually getting small doses of social interaction in the office. And by this, I don't mean talking to colleagues about purely work-related things, but I mean stuff like talking with my office roommate about a shared interest that we have, or having a laugh with another colleague about something funny that happened in the office, that kind of thing. Human connection. Of course, you won't necessarily have those things just by virtue of working in an office, but those were things that I did have from my own experience, and I found that without it, I actually got lonelier much faster working by myself. Instead, I now have to pay more attention to whether I'm getting the right amount of human interaction or socializing, because I didn't realize some of that need was being fulfilled by working in an office, and I had just thought, oh, I don't need to make social plans that often just because I'm introverted. Now, going for even a couple weeks without deliberately and intentionally setting aside time for socializing for myself is definitely no longer the right thing, and it's been an interesting exercise sort of relearning things that I thought about myself. Don't get me wrong, I still get tired and drained after large group gatherings or if I have to meet a lot of new people or talk to a lot of unfamiliar people, but I do need human interaction a little more than I thought. Which brings me to the second thing about working in a corporate environment that had a positive impact on me as an introvert, and which I don't think is as surprising, but it's something that I didn't really quite appreciate as much until now. Like I mentioned earlier, my preference or my comfort zone while I was working in an office was to spend most of my time working quietly by myself without talking to others too often. Of course, that wasn't the reality of the situation most of the time because I did work in an office with a lot of people and a team. Whether it was calling clients, meeting clients, going to court, giving work presentations, attending internal group meetings, my job required me to interact with people all the time. And these are all things I would generally prefer not to do if left to my own devices because they all fall squarely outside of my comfort zone as an introvert. But the fact that they were not comfortable for me to do and that I didn't really like them did not mean by any means that they were bad for me. In fact, looking back, I actually think they had a really good long-term positive impact on me as an introvert. I think the reason is that actually having to do these things regularly as a part of my work, whether I wanted to or not, or I liked it or not, really helped me hone and develop the skill of social interaction. I say skill here because I do think that, up to a certain extent at least, it is just an ability that can be learned and improved with practice, and as you do that, it'll become relatively more comfortable and easier to do over time. I'm not saying that it'll necessarily become something that's actually comfortable to do or that you'll like it or enjoy it, but it will become something that's easier and less stressful. As an introvert, I have never liked phone calls with people, and I still don't like them to this day. But after many years of practice of always having to call and speak to my clients because that was a part of my job, it became something that was less stressful and made me less anxious when I had to do it. And because I had to get that forced repeated practice in as a part of my job, then I learned other techniques to help improve the experience over time, like how to prepare, which I talked about in my other video. Regardless of personality or whether someone is introverted or extroverted, people, generally speaking and theoretically, are all able to stretch themselves and do things which are outside of their comfort zones. An analogy I've seen that I quite like is that our personalities are somewhat like rubber bands. They're able to stretch, but only so far. The question is really whether someone goes and does that or not, and to do that does require overcoming one's own inertia, which, to be honest, is quite a difficult thing to do. I mean, I'm not sure if left to my own devices, I would have pushed myself to learn how to deal with all the different types of social interactions I had to face while working as a lawyer. So I really do have to give my previous career credit for pushing me away from my own human tendency to maintain the status quo and stay in my comfort zone, which would have been to try avoiding all these types of social interactions altogether. Now that I've experienced the other end of the spectrum in terms of a work environment, it's definitely helped me better appreciate the pros and cons of both. And it's also reminded me that the grass isn't automatically greener on the other side. Either way, I still need to pay attention to how I'm reacting to an environment and if I'm staying in my comfort zone too much, and to also put in the work to figure out what's right for me. Oh, and also not knocking on something just because it's uncomfortable. Again, keep in mind that everyone is different and I'm just talking about my own personal experiences and preferences. With that in mind, I'm really interested in hearing in the comments down below if any of you have ever actually had any similar experiences or thoughts. Let me know and I'll see you guys in the next one.